In your case, too, I wonder, you know, you published Under the Bright Lights just about the time that Holt, your publisher, Henry Holt, also published Jim Burke's first Dave Rubus show, Neon Rain, and since he already had, you know, something of a career and a track record and whatever, maybe, do you think that overshadowed you?
Well, mine came out like six months earlier, but I do think that it's possible that they had to decide which Bayou thing they were going to get behind, and and I would suspect that they might have made the choice to make sure and back him. I was a total unknown. This is my first book. I don't know if they were positive I would have a second book. So
sure. Well, it's certainly a big risk for a publisher, you know, to make a giant push for somebody unknown, and there's only so much money to go around. But I wondered, you know, it is kind of an odd coincidence that you know, two of you would have
even started. Odder, we were corresponding by accident. He'd read a short story of mine in an anthology, and out of the blue wrote me a letter. We began to correspond, and I wrote to him and said, "Oh, I have this thing they're calling a Cajun cop thriller that I've sold," and he said, "Hey, me too." He wrote back, and I wrote back, and then he said, "Who with?" And I said, "Henry Holt," and he said, "Me too." And so it is a really strange
kind of a twinning.
Yes.
Well, he's such a nice guy. I didn't mean to imply in any way there was a sense of rivalry between you. It was just kind of the irony, you know, of both of these books from the same publisher and in something of the same time frame. But anyway, Jim is still writing The Rubus Show, but you have gone on in a new direction that I'd like to talk about. But I did want to ask you about a book called Woe to Live On, which I guess was your second published novel?
Yes, it was. Yes.
But is not one of the Renee Shade or your Ozark books. It is. I love the cover, and I don't know that we can show it to anybody, but the cover is actually a photograph from the Civil War era.
3 bushwhackers from Missouri. Those are 3 pretty well-known ones.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
This isn't just a random photo?
No, no, I know who all those guys are.
Well, who are they?
Well, the man standing is Dave Poole, who led his own small band at times and would join up with larger bands for larger things. The man at his lower left is Arch Clements, who was about the most feared member of all the groups, and that's a man named Hendrix on the other side there.
Well, it's a wonderful, wonderful picture, and it certainly informs the reader that this is a book set in the 1860s. And where is it on it's
Missouri,
in the secessionist
border,
right?
Yes.
So you're in that area where Quantrill's raid, and
very much so.
A lot of ambivalence about who they should be fighting for?
Well, the border war there actually started before the Civil War because Kansas, Missourians were going over to Kansas to vote illegally to try to make Kansas a slave state. So the tensions and the bitterness and the blood had already been getting spilled 4 or 5 years before the Civil War officially started. And there were some fairly large confrontations.
Wasn't John Brown out
in Kansas
sure was.
In this
before
he was a part of all that buildup, very much so.
Right.
Yes, yes. Very, very closely by the scene of all this. Very much involved.
So your story is basically a coming-of-age novel about a boy who, what does he do? He rides with the secessionists?
Yes, he's of German, he's a son of German immigrants. And one of the interesting things that I discovered in my research was that the pro-Southern settlers in Missouri had a particular disdain for German immigrants because the German immigrants, by and large, were more politically progressive. They were interested in, I think one of the reasons parts of Missouri have excellent public schools is the German influence. And the Germans were not unanimously, but overwhelmingly anti-slavery. So they were not welcomed by the pro-Southern settlers who had settled the central region between St. Louis and Kansas City along the Missouri River, which is called Little Dixie, actually. So much Southern influence exists there. And so I took wrote Jake as a German immigrant, and then he wants to be an American, so he just pledges his loyalty to the family that his father works for, and just tries to assimilate, but it's in a very brutal time, and it requires him to follow along into the war.
It's a wonderful book. Of course, at the time you wrote it, Charles Frazier hadn't, you know, knocked everyone's, yes, yeah. Cold Mountain hadn't been a bestseller and kind of, you know, revived the literature of the Civil War.
It was before that Civil War series on PBS also, and I also think that there was a phenomenon of, there's a black man in this book who rides with the Southern Bushwhackers. This is historically accurate. That's one of the things I stumbled across in research at the University of Kansas that really propelled me into this book. There were at different times 6 or 8 black men who rode with the pro-Southern Bushwhackers. One of the 2 scouts on the brutal raid on Lawrence was a black man, who's some of whom's letters survive. And so I thought, now that is an interesting twinning there. The German immigrant who wants to be an American and feels he essentially has to help people who don't like his people and who are suspicious of him. And then there's this black man whose loyalty is totally personal. He is loyal to one man, and that's his friend, and that's that. In the larger political sphere, means nothing to either one of them. They are not even thinking about that. They were young kids, and they went with their friends, and then eventually they begin to become aware of just what they're doing.
Well, it's wonderful that Holt has brought back Woe to Live On in your 3 Shade novels, but I also understand that there's a really thrilling film coming up of Woe to Live On, and the director is, let's see, Patrick wrote this down for me so I wouldn't mess this up, directed by Ang Lee, who is the guy that did Sense and Sensibility.
Yes, and Ice Storm and Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. He's a terrific director.
Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. What a great movie.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the same screenwriter as well, James Schamus. And I feel total trust in both of them, and they're both very courteous and nice to me and well to work with. And I went up and watched some of the shooting, and it was dynamic. It was a lot of fun to see.
What a superb irony that you who are a novelist but have been really principally a crime novelist may become best known for your not-crime novel.
It is. And then it had been out of print so long and everything, I had figured its life was over for the foreseeable future, that book, Woe to Live On, and to have them kind of pick it out of the past like that and decide to make a feature film using it was just a beautiful stroke for me.
Well, you know, sometimes a success of a book doesn't rely on how beautifully it's written, but rather on its marketability, and these intervening events we've just discussed, you know, Cold Mountain, the Civil War series, and so forth, may now be giving it what would have been nice to have received at the time. But hey, a book doesn't disintegrate or go bad on the shelf. So.
Well, I think one of the things is the history I chose to write about is pretty obscure to most Americans. And then that I would have a black man and a German immigrant riding with pro-Southern bushwhackers, I actually had reviews who implied that I didn't know what I was talking about. This couldn't, you know, couldn't be, more or less, and were therefore a little dismissive. And it was hard to get traction with the book then, because they, the publishers and everyone else had basically my word for it. 2 or 3 years later, a couple of new histories of the border wars came out, and I circled sections from them and sent them to New York City, I mean, because he said everything I said.
Wonderful. Well, I actually fell in love with your writing with the publication of your 5th book, Give Us a Kiss. It's a little difficult to describe it. I have a review that ran in the Arizona Republic from Ann Stevenson, who's, no, I'm sorry, she didn't write it. It's a Washington Post review.
Of that Tomato Red?
Right, republished republished in the Arizona Republic, and he's calling these kind of like white trash noir, which maybe works. Instead of your Cajun Sleaze series, the Shades, we've progressed to white trash noir. But you're from the Ozarks, and although you lived in Kansas for a while.
I've lived in a lot of places, but the Ozarks has been the ancestral home for 150 plus years.
You just had this wonderful voice. I mean, I couldn't imagine not wanting to know these people, falling in love with this guy.